Hello and welcome back to the KCC channel. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today we're jumping into some malicious compliance. Before we start, if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It's completely free and you can always change your mind later. Alright, our first story today comes to us from Alilia. You want me to read the lease? If you say so. Let's jump right in. Longtime lurker, first time poster. I just had the best malicious compliance today and thought I would share. Backstory. I moved to the Big Apple in April from LA and signed a lease for an apartment sight unseen. It was the same price as my LA apartment, but while in LA, $1,350 gets you a master bedroom with a walk-in closet, private bath, and 3 roommates. In New York City for $1,350, they've turned my closet into the bathroom, and I now weigh 135 pounds thanks to the 7 flights of stairs that I had to walk up every day. Some days I would raise my arms to put on deodorant and scrape my elbow on the ceiling. One of my 5 roommates was an RN though, so there was the upside. The only saving grace was that this apartment was pet friendly and had an in-unit washer and dryer. I hated living there, and after 2 months when my job said I could work remotely, I packed up and went to the Caribbean. While I was there, I won the New York City housing lottery. For the first time in my life, I could afford to live by myself in New York City of all places. I'd read in forums that landlords are usually pretty happy for tenants when they win and let you out of your lease no problem. Present day. So in my optimism, I sent the management company an email letting them know that I won the lottery and wanted to discuss terminating my lease early. They told me to speak to the brokerage to get my room filled. The brokerage told me that I would need to pay a broker's fee of $1,350 and still pay rent until they filled the unit, or I could try and fill it myself. I find a guy who was already applying with the broker for another unit and he wants my room. Then management says they want the guy I found to pay $1,400. This is genuinely the worst apartment that I've lived in. I don't feel right trying to get someone to pay $1,400 for this room. I'm in a bit of a time crunch as new guy wants to move in on August 1st, so I need to hire movers to take my stuff to storage the next day. But if I don't get the approval from management that everything is good to go on their end, then there's no point. So I need management to agree to let this guy take over my lease for the price that is on my lease. I argue that a new price would be a new lease, and if they want to do that, they would have to release me from the lease and market the apartment at this new price point. They refuse, saying that I should pay the broker's fee or forfeit my deposit and continue to pay rent until they get my room rented. I'm upset because management basically wants to make more money and assume no risk. I would end up paying until they rent out the awful room to someone. I tell them this is unfair and makes no sense. Then management tells me, well, there's no lease takeover in the lease. I'm confused because I vaguely remember reading something about a $500 fee for a lease takeover. Read your lease. We're doing you a favor before, but now we're only going by the lease, management tells me. So I find my lease because I remember there being this $500 clause. I never found the $500 clause because written on the first page of the lease was clause 2, length of lease. The term, that means length, of this lease is beginning on 2/1/22 and ending on 8/31/22. I'm elated. My move-in date for my new place is 8/25/22, so I no longer need to rush. All because management told me to read my lease. I give them back a call and request the email address to send my 30-day notice of intent to vacate, or if it should be mailed as it's not specified in the lease. Management tells me that I can't break the lease. I tell them I'm not, it ends next month. I send them a photo of the first page of the lease. He sputters and says, "You know it's a year-long lease, this is a typo. As you know, I just took over managing the building and I inherited some bad leases." I didn't know this, but I gleefully respond, well, I was doing you a favor before, but now I can only go by the lease. If the lease says my term ends next month, I have to honor that. He hangs up furious that this is happening. At this point, I am no longer concerned about hiring movers, so when he calls me back at 8 p.m., I'm ready to tell him the cutoff for the movers was 4 p.m. and that I will move out according to the lease. But he starts the conversation in a somber, defeated voice. "You can move out on the 31st. We just have to go according to the lease. We will do a final walkthrough and give you back your deposit. As I am still in the Caribbean, my cousin will be subletting for August, and I will be moving into my new apartment when I get back. Everything worked out in the end, all because I read my lease. Jumping down to the comments on this one, there's one from a user called KitchenArt677. It says, "Good job with the compliance. It's unfortunate though your story says a lot about the housing crisis in New York City. No one should be paying $13.50 for a room, and with 5 roommates at that. So many transplants come here and think it's okay to pay so much to live in the city, so landlords just keep hiking up the rent because someone thought it was a steal. No shade, it's just what New York City has become." OP replied to this comment and said, "I completely agree. I would have moved to New Jersey had I seen the apartment beforehand. I just wanted proximity to my office and thought, hey, this is just like my old place. Boy, was I wrong." I've actually spent a lot of time binge watching YouTube channels that go through the tiny apartments in New York City and then tell you how much those apartments are. Some of these are smaller than my closet, and they still want like $2,600 a month. It's absolutely absurd. One other thing from this story was to make sure that you always read your lease. Before you sign it, make sure you know what you're getting into, because some of these landlords are going to put clauses in there that are completely only in their benefit, and they'll just try to hide them in all the other stuff that's in there. So read your lease, know what you're getting into, and especially know what your end date is, because in this case, the end date was wrong. It worked in OP's favor, but it might not have. This next story comes to us from Slice of Pie. I'm sorry, I've been instructed not to help you with that. Let's jump right in. I work in a public sector job that's a union shop with a pretty active union. The opportunity to comply with poorly worded directions comes along fairly often if you're a crap stirrer, shop steward. And while sometimes it's worth a grievance, sometimes it's just way more fun to do precisely as I'm told. And they never seem to get that that's what comes next after I utter my favorite phrase in the world. Hey, would you mind sending me an email summarizing this so I have it to refer back to? We've used, up until really recently, a mainframe emulation program that's the flower of 1970s technology for the bulk of the work we do. I'm a bit of a geek for this stuff, and one thing I figured out how to do a number of years ago was write macros to automate actions. Everything from notices to be mailed out, to flipping through data screens looking for information, and even some data entry could all be automated. I was smart enough to not brag about this too much, so I didn't get voluntold to help support people with it. But I did tinker with it for years and had a pre-built toolset that I shared with anyone who asked. A friend I helped that way moved into management, and she contacted me asking for help with her staff, because she knew how useful it was, but not how to do it herself. On a separate note, and also because I'm kind of a geek, I was representing a worker at that time who had been in a particular manager's crosshairs, to the point that they'd had IT put a completely unsubtle keylogger on her computer. I was helping her with something else and was looking over her shoulder at her screen when I saw one of the alerts it tossed up. I asked her about it and she said it was weird, but she didn't know what it was. So I dug through her computer a bit and I showed her what was going on. The reaction from this manager was volcanic. She summoned me to her desk and admonished me about doing stuff that wasn't my job, and gave me very specific instructions that I was not, under any circumstances, to assist people with their computers, or anything else that wasn't spelled out in my position description. Sounds good, thanks for bringing that to my attention. Could I get you to shoot that to me in an email so I can follow up with any clarification? Certainly, she beamed at me. This was going so well. About 2 weeks later, my manager friend, who had to pull some strings to get me released for a day to come out to her branch in another county, it was about 45 miles away, came by. Since I was gonna ride out with her, I showed her the letter from Miss Thou Shalt Not, who incidentally wasn't my supervisor, and who I knew full well hadn't told my boss about it, or their boss. Sorry, I was instructed not to help with this. Not much I can do, see? She read through it and looked back up at me with a small but evil smile. You saved this just for me, didn't you? Of course I did. Merry Christmas in August, I guess. She had no end of trouble with Miss Thou Shalt Not in the past, and the opportunity to rain some hellfire was just too good. She took the copy of the email with her, and they had a private meeting in one of the conference rooms, and were joined about 5 minutes in by their mutual supervisor, who I was also on good terms with. She never did tell me what was said behind closed doors, but before the end of the day, I had an email retracting the previous instructions, and the manager responsible never referenced it again. The best part is, too, the employee I'd been helping told me a day or two later that she'd stopped getting those weird alerts all of a sudden, and asked if I knew anything about that. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Gnarly Narwhal Noms. If I've learned anything here, it's that if somebody asks you to repeat your instructions in an email, you should stop and think about your words very carefully until you figure out why what you just said was stupid. Let's be honest here though, if you have a manager that says something to you stupid enough that you want to get it in writing, they're probably not going to realize why you're asking them to get it in writing. They're not going to think about what they said at all, and you'll likely get what you ask for. This next story comes to us from Patient House, taking the work news to the news. Let's jump right in. I'm still unsure if it's really compliance, but my ex-employer announced some news regarding our jobs. It was obviously fake, but instead of calling the BS, I treated it exactly as I would have if it was true and it bounced back in their face. It was a while ago when I was working in a community-based organization. We provided end-of-the-line shelter for people and did rights advocacy in a medium town, 100,000 people. The salary was low but okay, but most employees were there because they believed in what we did. The main problem was the manager. She didn't act accordingly to the set of values the organization was based on. She was grossly overpaid compared to employees, took everything personal, made sure we were cut off from the administrators, and created an atmosphere where people feared retribution. We were unionized, but after a few months, I realized no one was ever filing complaints, even for trivial matters, because they feared she was going to lash back at them. Turns out, she had done it to a few people in the past. Once I figured I wasn't going to stay there much longer, I decided to sign all of the complaints I could. According to Union, I could sign anything I witnessed even if I wasn't the target, and figured I would see them to the end and leave. That way, administrators couldn't claim not knowing, and there was a chance for my colleague to have a better work environment. So, of course, the next few months were a living hell. She picked on me regularly. Still, most people sided with me, at least privately, most of them fearing she would do the same treatment to them if they declared it publicly. One morning, she calls a staff meeting and explains that a large amount of complaints have been filed in the last months, looks at me, and the cost to settle them or pay the lawyers to fight them might bankrupt the organization, and everyone is thus at risk of losing their jobs soon. Insert ominous music. Panic ensues. My colleagues are crying. They're calling their SOs. A lot of people are begging me to take them back, stating she got the lesson. Some of them are genuinely pissed at me. In my opinion, it was obviously BS made to turn them against me. I mean, the sole emergency housing of a 100,000 person city, annually filled at 115% capacity, would be closing for a dozen complaints where I'm not even asking for money in any form over legal fees which are usually budgeted in advance. Come on, it's basic fear brewing schemes. Normally, I would have questioned it during the meeting or tried to reason with them afterwards, but that time, I decided to comply with the narrative and treat it as true. I left for my break and did what I would have done if we were really closing, appealing to the public outrage to help us fulfilling our mission. I called the news, told them verbatim the morning announcement, the service hole it would create in the community, the job impact it would have in the city, etc. My local news picked it up. They called the manager and administrators about running the story, questioning how come there were enough complaints to threaten a 35-year-old pillar of the community services, asking what the complaints were about, etc. Before 4 p.m. that same day, we had another meeting to explain that we must have misunderstood the first meeting, as the organization was in no way, shape, or form in danger of closing. Sure, we must have misunderstood. Moral of the story, let those who brewed the piss drink it. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, there's a question from a user called Pink Pineapples 007. They asked, so what ended up happening to her? Did management or the union finally look at the complaints? OP responded to this one with, first, they unblocked money to have one of the administrators present 9 to 5 every day, just sitting and chilling in an office, shopping online to make sure nothing shady was happening. Yet, shady things did happen. After that, there was an investigation from a private firm, and finally, they offered her to quit without blame, which she did. We were very glad she left, but still amazed at how much impunity she had and how much money the organization suddenly could access. Check out all 3 OPs linked in the description down below. I thank you for watching, I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.